All right, guys. So today we're going to do a class on value curves and to kind of help give you some techniques to help raise some of the dimensions of your sequencing. So again, as I said, my name is Barry Wiles. I'll put my contact information up now because I've only got a couple of PowerPoint slides. I really want to get into X-Lights and show you guys a lot of this stuff live. There's just a couple of points that we'll need to touch on. So don't want to dwell on it too much, but feel free if you guys have questions or afterwards, send me an email at sequencestall@yahoo.com, or you can go on our Facebook and message us, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions or discuss some of the techniques that you'll see here in the presentation. So just to give you a 30-second elevator speech on who I am, I live in Florida, which is a great place to be because we have a lot of light shows down here. So Christmas is really exciting down here. I've been doing this for about 11 years. I started as a lightorama guy, and I got inspired by the video that eventually led into the Budweiser commercials. There's a lot of us that are in that generation. I have a technical background. I became that guy in the neighborhood. We had I live in a gated community, and we used to have a Christmas contest. So I said, hey, let's put some lights on the house. Biggest mistake I've made because I was hooked ever since. And, as everybody knows, it just continues to grow. So this is my 5th year using X-Lights. And we discussed earlier, I am the founder of Sequence Solutions. So what we're going to cover today, and I'm packing a lot in, so I'm going to try not to go so fast. I'm going to try to give you some relevant examples in the sequencing so you can kind of see what some of these things do and some of the feature sets X-Lights have in it. And we're going to talk about 2 different things. We're going to talk about what I'm going to call one-dimensional space. It's single value curves doing single functions. And then we're going to get into some 2-dimensional movement and some 3-axis movement on roto zoom and stuff if we have time to get into that. So I kind of look at X-Lights, and there's 3 very important pieces to it when you start really getting into sequencing at a little bit of a higher level or more detailed level. And there's been a lot of great presentations today. It's been great having all the various people involved, and we all kind of have a little bit of a different way that we come at it. So models and rendering and submodels, and there's going to be a topic up on that. Very important. Buffers and layers are a great strategy in X-Lights. And value curves. And value curves is what I'm going to cover today. So if I gave everybody in this room some paint and some paintbrush, and I said, go paint a picture of a Christmas tree, every picture would look different. It would look slightly different with the colors, the shapes, the sizes. And X-Lights is kind of the same way. X-Lights has so many tools, and the X-Light team has done some phenomenal stuff, and they continue to just raise the bar. So it's a way that you have to create art in our displays, and really no 2 sequences are alike. If you look at some of the guys, Tom and Ron and Clyde and Simon and Mike and myself, we all kind of do things just slightly differently, and that's kind of what's cool about X-Lights and sequencing. So what are the value curves? How do I find them? Where are they? And that's kind of what we're going to touch on. But the little green arrow, circular arrow, is your value curve friend. So he's going to tell you where a value curve is available on any areas of X-Lights. And they continue to add this feature to a lot of different things. So you have a lot of different capabilities. If I look at value curves, maybe even 4 or 5 years ago, there were only a few in certain locations, and then they just continue to push these. And I'm not going to go through all these types. I just want you to be aware, because we'll touch on some of these as I show some live examples. But you can see just in the standard set of value curves, there's quite a few options. And then I'm also going to discuss with you custom value curves and kind of how you generate those. And I'll touch on some of the key types. So where are value curves found? Just about all the effects have a value curve of some type in them. So I just picked a few. The fire effect, the on effect, the pinwheel, and even our color palettes. And we'll look into this more live in just a minute. So I'm just kind of laying a groundwork so you guys kind of understand, you know, where we're coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and splash the sponsor slide now, because this summit wouldn't be possible for two groups of people. The people that have put this on have done a great job. And a lot of sponsors like myself have come together to, you know, offer you guys a great pool of prizes and things, and bring knowledge that hopefully, you know, people will get and be able to, you know, improve their displays and improve, you know, what they're doing on their shows. So I'm going to bring up X-Lights, and I'm going to run through some basics. And then as we continue to go through, I'll show you a few more advanced techniques that would come across. When I put a sequence together, I like to have a lot of, I always use the word richness in a sequence. And what I mean by that is, I don't like to just slap an effect on something and just leave it alone. Almost everything I put down, you know, depending on where it's at in a sequence, I will change something. And it's usually a value curve. It might be some layer blending and buffering, but value curves can create such an interesting look, even on basic effects. And so what we're going to look at is just the on effect to start with. So if I click on the on effect, what I've done with this one, and I'm going to bring this in so you guys can see it. I'm going to cover the on effect does have one place, transparency, that you can play with. I don't play with that much. But more importantly, for the on effect is the color palette. And the color palette actually gives you quite a few options to play with. So in this case, if I just put the on effect on my whole house, and just to point out, if you guys, some people probably don't know this, when I put the off effect down here, the only reason I put it down there is it's kind of old school. I can click on that and it runs the effect above it. So I don't have to click on the effect if I don't want to. It's just, I don't put this in sequences usually. It's just when I'm demoing something. So if I click on that, it runs just that effect that's above it. So all I did was, if I wanted this to kind of go on and off. Now on the on effect, you do have the ability to, you know, change the intensity going from a start intensity to a off intensity. So I can get it to ramp down and up if I want. So that's one way to do it. But let's say I want it to go up and down. What you do is you click on the arrow for the brightness, and it brings up the value curve selection tool. And what you'll see on the bottom here is some of the different curves that you have access to for that particular effect. Now, this on brightness is the only one I've found that you have to be a little bit careful with how this does it, because I'm not quite sure why. It comes up with a maximum value of 400, but the brightness actually has an actual level of 100, right? You're not going to burn brighter. It's not going to burn your LEDs out, but you can't go above 100%. So if I were to leave that way, this thing would actually ramp up and clip. So you don't get a nice smooth up and down because it's hitting 100 early, and then the rest of that curve, it's not doing anything. So in the value curves, and all the curves are different, so they'll have some different sliders. You have sliders in here that you can play with to change these curves around. And so if I just wanted to go to 100% brightness, I can take this down, or you can type the number. I usually like to type the number because I get the exact number I want. Now what this is saying is my starting level is going to be 0. I'm going to peak at 100, and then I'm going to end at 0. And I'm going to get a nice ramp up and ramp down of the sequence. So very basic. I haven't done a whole lot of different things, but sometimes you'll have like a musical crescendo that you want. It kind of goes up and down, like a flute might come in or out or something. You can set this up to kind of make your brightness for whatever effects and colors you want to use kind of come up and down. Now, I have it on the whole house here just to kind of, accentuate it so you can see it. Another effect is you can do a sawtooth. So if you want a more rapid, exchange, I put the sawtooth in there. And with the value curves that have multiple, what I call frequent, cycles, let's say, like a ramp just does a ramp, or you do an up or down. These sawtooths, I can actually pick how many cycles I want. Now, obviously, if you get past something that's practical, X-Lights can only run so fast. I am personally, my sequences are all based on 40 frames per second. And you've heard it from some of the other presentations if you sat on them. A lot of that has to do with ramping and a lot singing faces and singing elements. I just believe I'll give Russell a shout out because he says more volts is better. I kind of like the frame rate, more frames better as well. So I follow the same philosophies. But so you get something like a ramp that gives you kind of an up and down motion. Sine wave, which I don't use very often, but it's kind of more of a fluid up and down, that kind of brings things in and out. And then we'll look at a square wave. And a square wave is useful if you want to try to blink things on and off. What a lot of people will do is, you'll put an on effect and an off effect and an on effect and copy that so many times. This gives you the ability to, kind of set that up without having to put down a whole bunch of effects. And again, this is another one where I can play with the cycles and deal with it. Now, one thing I want to point out, and this will become more important when we talk about custom effects, but I want to bring it up now on just looking at something as simple as a sawtooth. So when I open up the sawtooth, you're going to see something here that you didn't see when I opened it up earlier. You're going to see these blue marks. These blue marks match up with the timing marks that I have selected up in the top here, okay? So the first blue mark would be that being this effect runs over 4 bars here, it's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4. If you saw earlier, if I didn't select that timing mark and I selected this one, I hit it, those marks aren't there, okay? There's also, this is just a public service announcement. If you pick 2 timing marks, it will not show the timing marks because I've gotten in trouble with that where I'm like, I can't see my timing mark, what's going on. And I have found out that I had, more than one selected. So, and the reason that's important is if I want to line these square waves up the best I can on the beats or something, then I want those timing marks in so that I can play with these cycles and get the cycles set up kind of the way I want them to be lined up in the song. So if you want a very specific beat pattern where things are on and off, that's how you would do that. Now, something else in the color palette that you can play with is hue. So one thing I recommend when you're in X-Lights playing around, sometimes it's not going to be intuitively obvious what a value curve might do or how it might present on an effect or on a color. So one thing I'll usually do is I will play with these sliders and kind of look at what happens manually, okay? Because you can always change the value manually and it'll stay, right? And I might, like on a hue, I might say, I just want a very subtle change in the hue. I don't want to go all the way from, beginning to end. And then what I can do is I can come in here and select a curve that I think fits the path I want. So let's say I want to go from, whoops, I should put -50 in there. Let's say I want to go from -50 to 50. And I make that change and it changes the hue. And where I find hue is great to use in places where you have emotion, a lot of Halloween stuff. If you're trying something kind of a little spooky, you kind of get a slow change of mood. It's a great way to make a transition from one color palette to another and kind of put a neat spin on your sequence. I find a lot of times in kind of a slower transitional point in a song, I want to kind of play with the hue, I can bring the hue in and out, you know, depending on how you do it. I have a sequence I did where it was heat miser versus freeze miser. You know, obviously freeze miser, you know, everything's blue, white, you know, kind of cool colors. Heat miser is more red, orange, yellow. So I kind of had a point where I changed the hue on some effects from one hue to another to make that transition in the song work and bring it in. So if we look at, I want to bring the effect up as well, because you're also going to be able to make combinations of things. So, you know, we just talked about, you know, playing with the value curves and the color, but then the effects themselves have it. So I'm using plasma. Plasma has one thing that you can change on a value curve, and that's speed. So you can actually go in and put a value curve on the speed of the transition of the plasma. So the plasma usually runs very slow. If I don't put anything on this, you know, or if I adjust the values, you know, you're going to get a constant speed. But sometimes I'll have a sequence where I want, you know, the mood's changing, it's speeding up, and I want the effect to speed up. And I'll show you that in, you know, snowflakes and some other things when we get into that. So let's go into, I would say my favorite two effects are probably the spirals and the pinwheel, because they have a lot of versatility in what they can do. And there's a lot of different things you can do with them. And then when you put them on different props, they can create different effects. So if you look at the spiral effect, for instance, there's 4 things that we can play with. We can play with the palette rep, which is basically the number of bars that you see on the screen. The spiral wraps, which is the angle of those bars on the display. I can play with the thickness. And I can play with the movement, positive or negative, depending on which direction that you want those bars to move in. So let's look at the palette rep first. Now, you may have a situation where you want to start increasing the number of bars that the effect shows. So you may be starting off with 1 or 2 bars, and then you may, you know, may want to increase them for a reaction in the show that you're putting on. So that's one place we can make an adjustment and play with. We also have the ability to put a, oops, I've skipped one, welcome back to it, on the thickness. So here I put a sawtooth on the thickness to kind of get an in and out movement look. So I'm changing the thickness of those bars. I'm holding the movement constant and everything else constant, just so you can kind of see what these effects work with. One that I play with a lot is the spiral wrap. So in this case, I'm moving from one side to the other. You're kind of getting this wavy look, and it allows you to put some motion in. And when you combine this with some other things, you can kind of get some neat effects when you do that. So let's try putting all those together. If my computer will, sometimes, there we go. So this is, I'm changing all these variables all at the same time. And it's, one thing you'll find with X-Lights, and I find this a lot when I'm sequencing, sometimes I'll just throw stuff together to see what it looks like. And I would say 9 times out of 10, you look at it and you'll say, oh my God, it looks horrible, and you won't use it. But every once in a while, you'll run into something useful, or you'll tweak some things and get an effect that maybe you wouldn't have thought of when you tried to plan it out. So a lot of times in the what I call the off season, right after the holidays, you know, the first couple months of the year, I'll just sit and play with things. I'll throw things on mega trees and matrices and effects. And a lot of people do that, just kind of playing around to kind of see what different effects I can get in different color schemes and things like that. And when I write a sequence, I tend to be a visual programmer. So when I listen to a song, I tend to try to capture the mood of the song, think about what the colors will look like, and some of the things I want to do, you know, and that kind of impacts sometimes the effects that I want to put in. So let's put this on a particular prop. So I'm going to put the spiral. Spirals work really well on candy canes. So if I put just the dancing, we were playing with just the spiral wraps themselves, and we wave them back and forth, you can kind of get this wavy effect on your candy cane. And it's a neat effect. You can put it on beat to the music, and you get kind of a nice visual from that when you're sequencing a song, and it'll stand out. People will see it. I kind of have a little bit of a non-traditional house layout. For me, I have palm trees that I've put LEDs on and flamingos, and I'll run some of these effects on them, and it looks really neat, you know, when you put it on some of these props. I'm gonna move this out of the way here for a minute. Let me close these out so we can get a little more room. And then the other thing with the stripes, you know, we talked about playing with the speed. Some of the things I did, I'm going to bring the color palette out of the way for now because we're not going to be using that for the next little while. So in this case, what I did is I actually put a ramp on the movement. So I took it from almost 0 and I sped it up, and it creates kind of a, you know, we're starting off slow, and then I'm speeding things up to kind of get a feel for what that is. Now, this is one of those effects that I kind of stumbled on playing around with the value curve. So we kind of showed the rocking back and forth, and we looked at the speed. So I put the rocking back and forth and the ramp on the speed on the effect, and I got this kind of dancing or shuffling candy cane look, and I kind of thought that looked kind of neat. So you're kind of getting this wave movement, but you're also kind of getting a shuffle that almost makes the candy canes look like they're dancing. And when you look, you know, farther out from your show, it kind of is a neat effect when you're looking at it. So this is a case where now I'm combining a couple of different value curves. So I've taken one effect on one prop and changed the 2 different value curves and given you 3 different looks on that prop. So that's what's so great about X-Lights and having all these tools and all the ability. And I could shift the hue on that. I could change the brightness. I mean, you really can go crazy. You know, sometimes you have to rein in yourself. If you've ever watched any shows where people are doing design or composing music, they'll tell you sometimes you got to rein in and not over produce it or over set it up. But these are all things that really you can bring to the table and put on an effect and get some really neat effects on your show. And you don't have to. One of the great things about doing something like this, if you're starting out and you don't have a lot of props, this gives you the ability to put some excitement in the show, because people are going to be able to see these props more directly. You know, in some of the larger displays, sometimes some of this stuff, you know, gets lost, or and people would have to see your show multiple times to kind of catch some of the different things going on. But if you only have a few elements, or you just want to start out and maybe put some candy canes in, the couple of props I think everybody should have are spinners, because spinners allow you to do so many different things on them. So even if you just have a couple of spinners, some snowflakes, and some candy canes and an outline, you can do some great things on a show with just those elements. So that gives you the spirals. Let me just check the time here so that I make sure we don't run over, because there's a couple of key points I want to get to and some more advanced topics. So like I said, the pinwheel is one of my favorites, and the pinwheel has quite a few things that we can adjust. And the reason I picked this one is it's going to help us move into the motion category. So not only does a pinwheel have all these different value curve options on selection, it's one of the elements that allows you to change position. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. In this case, all I'm doing right now is I'm changing the side of the pinwheel with a ramp up and a ramp down. Now, there's a couple different ways to do that. If you're familiar with layer blending, there's a layer blending technique where a circle explode. There's on the wave function, there is a circle open and close feature. So again, there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. The reason I'm showing you that this way is because I want you to understand, the value curves and what they're capable of doing. So another thing we can play with is the spiral twists. And you're going to see this technique a lot. You see a lot in my sequences. I think it's a great thing to play with. And all this is doing is it's giving you the ability to swing those tails around. And you can overlap a couple of these to get some neat effects to where you've got them 180 degrees out of sync, and you can get some really cool looking things. So it's the point being that these curves are all going to give you a little bit different touch on all the different techniques. I'm going to move through these pretty quick because I want to get to a couple more advanced things that you guys can see. Another one is the width or thickness. I haven't played around with this a lot. I've used it to tweak a couple times on something where there was a sequence I put out for the COVID for free for people to download that had some sunshine rays that I kind of opened up the width of as the effect went through. So it was something that was probably one of the few cases where I've used width. And then speed. And speed, again, a lot of people don't use speed on the effects. I actually think it brings an element in and really does accentuate some things, especially if you got something that's going from slow to fast. It kind of helps bring that into the show. And you'll see this in a lot of sequences I put together because it's just a visual thing, I think, that helps you, kind of get a feel. Offset, there's usually you might put a curve on it. This is a relatively new feature that the Excise team put in. All it does is it allows you to start the pinwheel rotating from a different point. So if you want to have two pinwheels overlapped and one start or move slightly out of sync with the other one, that's kind of what the offset is. So I haven't played with a value curve on it. And then the other two important curves are x-axis, which is your left to right movement, or what we call horizontal movement. And your vertical movement, which is up and down, which is your Y direction. Now, all I did on this one was I put a up and down ramp. Something on movement, and so that you understand sometimes how they have this broken out, is on the value curves, they'll go from -100 to 100. That's your full screen movement from bottom to top. And it's the same for left to right. So if you were to look at the value curve from left to right, it would have gone from -100 to +100. It's just how X-Lights does it. I could combine those, for simple movement. If I wanted to go that diagonal, I could put two value curves on, and these are just linear ramps, and it will take it, from the left to the right corner. So that kind of gives you that movement. So let's use it let's look at it on an example. So these are the big arches. So if any of you went through the build, I love these. I'm building some and putting them on. I've had just regular arches on my house. I have a relatively small yard. So I'm putting these in. If you look at them, it's kind of hard to see. It's kind of like a half a spinner inside an arch, and I really like the look of them. So this is just as simple as putting that fan in and wiggling, back and forth. I think that's kind of a neat effect. And then this is one where I kind of explode and speed up and speed down. So very basic, but again, it captures your eye. When you're watching this show and these arches are in the front, I use these at key points in a song where I really want to kind of accentuate, a point or when something's on. And then this is, I was talking about snowflakes, again, with speed. So if you put, this is just putting the fan on some snowflakes in a model and expanding it and contracting it and adding some speed. It's, again, you're hitting a crescendo moment, or you're hitting something where the music's starting to take off, or the emotion starting to take off. It's just it's a simple effect to help you bring some emotion into the sequence and for your user. Now, another one that I like to use is the kaleidoscope. And the kaleidoscope allows you to do some neat things. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but what I'm going to use the kaleidoscope to talk about is custom value curves real quick. And I'm going to kind of throw a lot at you. So if you have questions after the show, you message me or email me. I'll be more than happy to answer questions, because I'm going to go through some of this kind of quick. But Xlights gives you the ability, if you want, I'm going to cover the matrix up because for whatever reason when I go into programming, it gives you the ability to actually draw a value curve if you want. So in this case, this was from Heat Miser, Freeze Miser. So if you think about the song, it goes dun dun dun, and there's a long tuba play in there. So when you watch the effect, it kind of builds, and then it contracts back to what it's doing. And all I did was, with the kaleidoscope effect, is as you increase this value, it creates more repeats of the image. So what I did was, there's a selection in here called custom, and I can go in and create these points and put them in place. So if I wanted to put a point here, I could double click, and then I can move this around, and I can build this with however many points I want. The only thing Xlights won't let you do, and I've got to talk to them about it, is you can't get a vertical like on a step. You can only put 2 points so close to each other, and that's as tight as I can get it. So you can't get like a pure step change, and there might be a way to do it. I've never figured it out. But the other piece of this is, so if I'm drawing a curve that I like, I might want to have different levels and brightness or something. When I get one that I like, I can actually export it and save it. So I can save a value curve and I can use it, later if I want to do that, or load it in. So if I've saved it, I can go in and load it. I'm not going to load these spiral ones because these spiral ones are going to be something I'm going to show you in a minute. So again, you have the ability to do a lot of different things, and I think you can figure out, go in and play with that. So like I said, with this one, you can see where we start out. We kind of do a level, and then we draw back. Just putting a, if you want like kind of an ocean view, if you put a value curve on a sine wave, you can kind of get this up and down motion. So I was trying to give you some practical examples, but I'm going to skip over the shader for a minute, and I want to get into 2D motion, because 2D motion is, I think, important. So we talked about the spiral. There's a tool in here. Let's go to the heart. I'm going to do it with the heart because I think this is easy. So there's a video, if any of you have seen it or been involved with Xlights, there was a gentleman who did, and he did this without all the tools we have. So man, he has my admiration on how he did this. But he had a heart with a bunch of little hearts dancing around it, and it was really interesting how he did that without the tools that we have now. But Xlights has a built-in tool under Tools called Generate 2D Path. And what this allows us to do is create a custom motion like this heart moving in a heart direction. And this is something that not a lot of people use, and not even a lot of people know about, which I found pretty surprising. I was talking to a couple people, who sequence quite regularly, who actually didn't know this feature was in here. So what's cool about this is you can create any kind of motion you want, and you get these points. So this green is where it begins, the blue is where it ends, and I can double click and add as many points as I want. Now, the tool doesn't have a lot of editing features in it, so I'm going to say I want to exit and start over because I just created those points because I want to show you what you can do with this. So let's go in and say I want to draw the motion of a heart. What it allows you to do is put an image in here. So I can browse. I can pick an image of a heart, and it puts the image of a heart in here. So now what I can do is I can trace this heart and get the motion that I want. And you can use as many points as you want. What I find is as long as you get them close and don't have a lot of like really long straight lines, it actually looks really good. So I'm going to go through this heart. And all I'm doing is double click, and you can't see it. I'm double clicking with the mouse on all these points that I want to put in, okay? And let's say I go out here and I say, oh, I cough, or I grab a drink of my coffee, and I do that by mistake. I can go in and just select that point, and I can bring it back in, and I can move these points around if I want to by just clicking and holding and bringing them in. And then what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go down to the bottom and click on that, okay? Now that I've created this, what I'm going to do is hit generate. Now, there's something, and there was it did it one way and did it the other. So the way motion works, and I didn't show it on the sliders, the Y motion actually is opposite to the generator, if this makes sense. So you end up having to flip this thing upside down. And Keith did a video on all this. I think it's on the X-Lite video under 2D motion. So I would go back and watch it. It'll explain some of this. But you have to flip this thing upside down to get the motion to work the way you want it. Then I hit generate, and I can call this whatever I want. I can call it heart.
Hey, Barry, just a heads up, this is the 10-minute mark.
Gotcha. Okay, we're doing good then. I'm going to hopefully close this out. So what I've done is I've generated a custom set of value curves that when I put them on the X and Y motion is going to give me this heart motion. So I go down to the X motion and I open the box, and it does two things. When I create a custom motion, it actually puts a value down here for the custom. So you can see that first one says X curve, heart X curve, heart Y curve. And then I actually have a spiral in here from another one I was doing, a spiral X and Y. So this creates a set of X points and a set of Y points that combined together will give you that heart motion. So what you have to do is you have to load the X in first. So I just opened up the X and I said, okay, pick the X. Now I'm going to pick the Y. I'm going to go down here and pick the Y curve. You can also load them. If they're not in there, I can come in and save these value curves. Remember, we just exported it. It created an X and a Y file. I can pick the heart Y and open that and put it in. And then when I accept that, I get this heart motion. So if you have any element that has the ability to do X and Y movement, you can put these curves in and do. So I have one where like I spiral something from the outside to the inside. So I created a spiral. You can do that. So let's use this as an example to build this. I'll show you kind of how we would build this heart thing and how we're doing it. So what I did here was I just used the image or the shape effect. I picked the shape. I actually used an emoji because I look at this one. And I'm putting this in the center of the display. Now, this is where I'm going to have the hearts dance around. So if I go here and I add the heart and put these two together, now you can see how the heart dances around. Now there's another feature, and I'm not going to get too much into it because of the time crunch we're on. If you look at the layer setting tab, there's a buffer and a roto zoom, and I like roto zoom. Roto zoom gives us the ability to do motion in a lot of different ways. So if I were just to pick, oops, I went one too far. I gave you I can go and do X rotation, and I can make that heart spin around in the X direction. And I can go to Y rotation, put a value curve on it, like a slant, and make it go around in the Y direction. And I can do the same thing with the Z rotation. And now what he does with the Z rotation too is there's some presets up here. So I can say, give me a counterclockwise. So I could spin that heart around like that if I wanted. I could go in counterclockwise. So again, all these value curves in motion just give you an unlimited array. So now let's do this. Let's take that heart and let's take the little hearts. What I did was, it's going to take a second to render, I'm sure, because of my computer. What I did was I staggered a bunch of these hearts down. I'll move this stuff off the screen here for a minute. And hopefully it's going to catch up in a second. There we go. So what I did here was I staggered the start of these hearts, and I just put a whole bunch of them down, picked a different color for each one, and I have these hearts dancing around. I put a roto zoom on that center heart, and then for the heck of it, I put a fan effect in the background with a brightness of about 50%, and then had the fan open up. So this kind of gives you the ability, or kind of shows you, bringing all these pieces together, how you can get some pretty elaborate looking elements in your sequence. So, and this is a more complicated move because you're moving a heart. Now, like I said, this doesn't even look good because then he rotated this whole thing around as well. I mean, I have a math background. It's like he probably had to have figured out a spreadsheet and calculated all these positions and everything. In his, because it's pretty complicated. And Keith and the boys have put this in this 2D model. It's made it interesting. So one last one I want to give you is the water effect. And a couple things that we can do with the water effect. And because I'm running this on a high definition, with Zoom and everything, my computer's having a problem catching up. Let me hit render real quick. It'll take a second to render. A couple seconds here, but the water effect's another one that if you put some motion in, you can kind of get some interesting effects with. And hopefully this will render enough that we can see it. Runs a lot slower when I got Zoom and everything open, so. But all I'm doing with the water effect is I'm creating kind of a jet tail look just by making the motion run from X to Y. And just I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, when you're rendering, if you click on this, it tells you it's rendering. And because I'm putting this on a P10 panel, you can see that's what's holding up the rendering is the rendering on the P10 panel. So another little trick if you want to see what props take the longest to render or not render. It's a little trick that's in X Lights. So hopefully we'll get through this in another minute. There we go. Let's see. Okay, so in this case, all I'm doing is I'm taking the liquid effect and I'm moving it from left to right on the display. And all I did was on the X-axis move, I put a movement in that. And it kind of gives you, and that, this is a way if you want to try to create a shooting star look. If I do this, maybe I put the color white on it. So I put white and red together. I kind of get those sparkle looks when I'm shooting across. I can flip this one, put these up so you can kind of see what I'm doing. One thing I can do is I can flip this on its, let's see, the horizontal is what I want. And I can have them come into each other. So motion, value curves, and all those things allow you to do some really cool stuff. And taking effect that if I didn't put anything on this, if you just looked at it without the motion, all it's going to sit there and do is what this white's doing. It's just going to kind of, throw these water droplets in the air. And I could put a custom motion in. I just did a sequence called Into the Unknown, and one of the things is Elsa standing in the middle, and I'm trying to recreate that swirling snow thing that she did. And I put a custom swirl in there with this effect, and it looks like she's got this thing shooting around her head and then taking off into space. So I think we're at just about at the stopping mark to start asking questions. So I hope I gave you some practical examples. There's a lot to this. I mean, we could talk, I could run through various effects and show how to tweak these. And, there's a lot of different things you can do. So my recommendation would be just to play around, go in and play with the sliders, throw some value curves on, you know, mix and match things, put things on top of each other, play around. And I think you'll find that there's some really interesting things you can do with X-Lights and all the stuff that goes in on it. So appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. We can kind of look at some of the questions if you want. I think I got to stop sharing in order to see the chat.
You can use your upper screen and see both.
Can I? I'd probably
Yeah.
just stop sharing. Let's see.
If you was sharing, it's an upper menu, but now that you're not sharing.
Yes, sorry. It was just, I think Tom or somebody had the same. Yeah, so somebody said, can the hearts be multicolored? Yeah, I've actually put gradients across where they've been, you know, red on the outside and pink in the middle. You could put a value curve on the hue. You can, if you're familiar with layer blending and masks and stuff, you can actually mask the heart with a color. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but you can do a lot of that stuff. So let's see, what else is there? You see anything? Can the hearts be multicolor? I got. Appreciate everybody saying thanks. Great session. Yeah, there's definitely, trust me, and I love programming. I travel a lot, so I sit in hotel rooms a lot. So that's kind of where I got into the sequencing thing. It gives me something to do outside of work. Otherwise, I'm just working on work emails all night. So I carry a portable screen with me, and I do. Hopefully they did record it. Whoever said. Says, I think the 2D generator allows us to create the custom value curves. Once you have the curves set in X, Y, you would then use the timing marks on the cycle. Yeah, so once you save those, you can bring them back in and you can play with them, and then it does save them based on, it's strictly motion. So when you put that effect in, it's going to follow that motion. I quit sharing my screen, but like those hearts, if I make that effect shorter, it's going to follow that motion through the whole effect, and they'll actually move quicker. And if I drag the effect out, they'll move slower. So the time, it doesn't do anything with the timing. The motion strictly follows however long you put the effect down on the timeline. So that's why if you look at how I staggered them, I kind of picked a stagger that kind of put it so they weren't running into each other. And it's all dependent on how much time you want that heart. Like I could make that heart spin around that heart once for 30 seconds, I would drag that effect out for 30 seconds. So I hope that kind of answered that question for you. I don't know, I'm not seeing any other questions. I appreciate everybody, you know, for the positive, you know, comments. And like I said, on the 2D generator, Keith did a video on it probably a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, that showed that heart thing. That's why I used the heart to recreate. So if anybody ever went back to it, I wanted to, he kind of showed how to do it, but he didn't show the heart piece of it. So I wanted to show you kind of how to do it so you go away and try to mimic it if you can. So let's see, are you doing this per model or as a group applied to all? You can do both. A lot of times you're using it on a matrix. You can do it on multiple models. I've done, I'm trying to think, there was something I did on spinners that I used a custom motion to get an effect I wanted on a spinner. So you can do it, just you make sure you're in the per model preview mode versus the standard preview mode. And that's a whole nother, you know, topic for that. We got one more minute, I think, right? There we go. Somebody answered a question for somebody. That's good. I appreciate that. That's what the community is all about. So can you save custom effects? Yes, you can. So if you select the effect and right click it, there is a way to save your effect presets. And I do that a lot because, you never know when you might want to go back and save it. So effects can be saved as individual effects. Unfortunately, I don't have time. I can chat with somebody, offline or whatever and talk about that. So I think we're at our stopping point because I think we got to